morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today we need to talk about a really weird news story about what appears to be base set proxies, which have been graded and I believe put up for auction. Now, this is one of those stories that's coming from a million different places. Quachancy over on Twitter shared some really nice close-up images of some trainer cards. We're going to talk more about them in a minute. Over on Imgur, which is a website I've never really understood, there has been a nice little gallery of all of the Pokemon put up there as well that gives us some information, but they've been graded by CGC, and everything that I'm hearing is that these are actually legit and amazing. Now, in terms of a price, these are going to be absurd. These are going to be absolutely ridiculously over-the-top absurd. These are going to be some of the most ridiculous cards you've ever seen. So, yeah. But it's interesting to me because artwork-wise, they're a little bit all over the place. Like, if we look at Porygon, well, that's the Imakuni Porygon artwork. That's a 3D artwork from the original Porygon that we had back in the base set. But a bunch of others have placeholder art. If we have a look at the Charizard, for instance, that's not the iconic Mitsuhiro Arita artwork we've all come to know and love. That's just stock, I believe, Kentagomori artwork. It's not the same. And this just opens up a bunch of cool little tidbits here, which I think are just absolutely fantastic. Now, what we're not going to do is a side-by-side comparison of every single card to their eventual printed version, for fear that we will go crazy. But you'll notice that Charizard, for instance, I believe that says it used to do 80 damage, it got upped to 100. And if anybody's wondering, well, hang on a second, Wassy, why do we see this? Why does a prototype Charizard do 80, but the real Charizard does 100? Well, the answer very simply is, they did a bunch of testing. They made these proxies, these original kind of drafts, if you will, and then they play some games and they basically go, look, Charizard's like one of the biggest dudes here, right? Fully evolved first partner Pokemon, all of that. This is rubbish. 80 damage is too low. It's not competitive enough. We need to up this to 100 damage or else no one's ever going to play Charizard, and we kind of want people to be playing Charizard. So that kind of makes a little bit of sense. But conversely, Blastoise used to be 4 energy 60. Now it's 3 energy 40. Now it does 10 more for each energy on there, but only up to a maximum of 2. I'm afraid I cannot quite read what the Blastoise text says on the redone version. But it seems like Blastoise has actually been nerfed a little bit. They looked at Blastoise and went, mate, this is a little bit too good. Let's just wind this in a little bit. And shout out to Rattata, who's exactly the same and just terrible. Absolutely terrible. But, you know, we needed to mention it at least, just because it's kind of fun. And look, I can't share any pictures or anything like that, but I did go to Creatures last August when I visited Japan, and I saw some playtesting cards, and this is what playtesting cards basically look like. You know, your proxies you make before you playtest, you just literally print them out on paper, stick them over existing cards, and go and play a bunch of games with them. And it all kind of makes perfect sense. But this does then make me think, well, hang on a second. What about the really good cards? What about the ones that made a gigantic difference? What about Hitmonchan, which, let's face it, we all know at this point was broken? Yeah, Hitmonchan's the same. 70 HP, single energy 20, free energy 40. Hitmonchan hasn't changed. Remember, Hitmonchan was broken. Hitmonchan was a ridiculous card. Exactly the same. The other one from base set that really ended up being broken just because of its speed and consistency was Electabuzz, which seems to be the same. 70 HP, single energy, 10 damage, flip a coin if heads paralysis, 2 energy, 30 damage, flip a coin if heads it does 40, but if tails it does 10 to itself. These were the two cards from base set that people really took and ran with, and it seems to be that they've basically ended up the same at the end of it all, which I do find rather interesting. But what about computer search? Now, shout out to lovely Antoine Boulet here, who did look through a bunch of the trainers and try and find some differences, and did. And there's one difference that I cannot believe was ever a thing: beta computer search. Now, or alpha computer search, really. One of the really cool things here is that because we've got the close-ups from Quachancy over on Twitter, I can read these and confirm. And basically, old computer search was exactly the same as new computer search, but you only discarded one card from your hand. Computer search is one of the most ridiculous cards Pokemon ever printed. You discard 2 cards from your hand, and then you get to search your deck for any one card. It's an absurdly good card. And if you played base set, you're probably playing for computer search, or at least you're playing many computer search. It's a ridiculous card. One of the best, most broken cards we've ever seen in the history of the game. And this is one of those ones where I feel like super confident saying this, because, oh my word, it's a ridiculous, ridiculous card. Okay. Now imagine you only have to discard 1 card from your hand in order to actually use this. It's just ridiculous. Like, this was never going to be a thing. Like, remember, when computer search got reprinted later on, they literally made it an A spec, which means 1 per deck, but also if you're playing computer search, you're not allowed to play any other A spec. And it used to be way better. And I imagine they did testing and they were just like, this is one of the most absurd cards we've printed. This is a redonkulous. But there's one card, a really good card, that actually got buffed up. Now, Super Energy Removal was another card which I think we can safely put into the, oh my goodness, that's a ridiculous version, right? It's a ridiculous card. You discard 1 energy attached to one of your Pokemon in order to discard 2 energy from one of your opponents. And the original version of this was actually much, much fairer. You discarded 2 energy from one of your Pokemon to discard 2 energy from one of your opponents. And apparently they decided that wasn't good enough, and then they buffed it so you only had to get rid of 1 of your own to get rid of 2 of your opponents, which is clearly too good. That's one of those cards where you look at the alpha version and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I get it. That makes perfect sense. And then you look at the real version and you're like, what did they do? Yeah. Lass is a card that you and your opponent show each other your hands, shuffle all trainer cards from your hands back into the deck. It's pretty disruptive. Oh, it used to be better. The alpha version of Lass discarded all trainers rather than shuffling them back. Which is, yowza, ladies and gentlemen, I think is fair to say. Absolute yowza. Also, literally called miniskirt, if anybody's interested. And I did just go and check the Japanese version of Lass from the base set, just in case I was, being dumb. And yeah, the Japanese version of this card is called miniskirt. Apparently, I never knew this. I learned that making this video, which is frankly a little bit weird. And then there's a couple of really weird cards that do things that Pokemon cards do not do. So Pokemon Trade had both players choose a Pokemon from their deck and put it in their opponent's hand. Yes. Does your opponent keep that card? Not entirely sure. But then we also had the card Take This Pokemon that let you give your opponent a Pokemon from your hand in exchange for a card from their hand, although that one they could say no and you just draw 2 cards, which basically made it Bill. And Bill, bearing in mind, it's important to remember back then supporter cards weren't a thing. So Bill being a trainer card basically meant it was an item card. It was an item card that let you draw 2 cards. It was ridiculous. So this was basically just another version of Bill. So that was a weird one. And essentially, I think the deal here is that you don't want a game where you're giving each other Pokemon, like you're giving your opponent your card to put into their hand. There's 2 cards here, both of which let you put a card into your opponent's hand. And that just led to so many, or it would have led to so many issues. You'll notice that when the base set actually released, we didn't have this. This wasn't a thing by the time the base set came round. We didn't have cards that would put your Pokemon in your opponent's hand. And I think there's, frankly, a pretty gosh darn good reason for this. I don't think anyone's going to be particularly upset that this is how it ended up going, because that was... I think destined for failure is a very nice way to put it. It was never going to work. So let's just have a quick look at a bunch of these now, just so I can make sure I've shown you all of the stuff that's out there. Here is, we just go through in order nice and quickly. So we've got a nice little image here that's got your Charizard, your Blastoise, and your Venusaur. Plus, you've got your evolution lines for Pidgeotto, Beedrill, and Eradicate. Here's the next one where you got yourself your Alakazam and your Poliwrath and all that good stuff. Here's one where we've got your Machamp and your Hitmonchan and all of those lovely ones. And here's the final one that's got Porygon and Mewtwo and all that good stuff. So there we go. Bunch of alpha Pokemon cards from the base set, which are weird and awesome, and I love them. But I've told you all about that now, ladies and gentlemen. So now it's over to you guys. Tell me what you think about these old alpha cards. Tell me how much you want these kind of things. Tell me if any of the things I've told you in this video surprise you. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi. That's where we talk about Pokemon and a whole bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all kinds of fun things. And of course, I should say, get shout-outs on the channel like the lovely Matt DS, who's been a supporter of ours for a while now and is a very lovely person. So shout-out to them for the support and the loveliness. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.